Most Americans can't cover a $1,000 emergency without borrowing money. Not during a recession, not during a financial crisis, right now, in 2026. In what economists keep calling the strongest labor market in decades. And here's what nobody's really saying out loud. It's not because people stopped being responsible, it's because something in the math stopped working. Something structural. Something that drains value from your budget completely legally, every single month in ways most people can't quite put their finger on. Your salary didn't go down, your hours didn't change. And yet at the end of every month, there's less left over than there used to be. Not dramatically less, just quietly, stubbornly less. The news keeps telling you inflation is easing. Economists point to charts that show things cooling down. So why does it still feel like you're running just to stand still? That feeling is not a mistake. It's not anxiety. It's not poor financial planning. Here's what's actually happening. The data that says things are getting better is measuring the wrong thing. Today we're going to fix that. We're going category by category through what's actually rising in 2026 using Bureau of Labor Statistics CPI data, Energy Information Administration reporting, and healthcare analysis from KFF. We'll show you exactly why official numbers keep missing how costs land on real households and walk through which parts of your budget are likely to stay elevated and which might finally ease. This is the data decoded. And by the end, the math is going to make a lot more sense than it has in a while. Before the categories, let's establish one thing clearly. When economists say inflation is moderating, they're reporting a weighted average across hundreds of spending categories. Some go up, some go down, and the total blends into something that looks manageable on paper. But you don't experience a weighted average. You experience your electricity bill, your rent, renewal. The moment your health insurance deduction changes and you have to rework the entire month. There are two fundamentally different types of costs in any household budget. Discretionary costs are things you choose, restaurants, streaming services, weekend trips. When pressure builds, these go first. Cancel tonight, skip the trip. It's not fun, but it works. Essential costs are different. They show up whether you chose them or not. Rent or mortgage, electricity, water, gas, groceries, health coverage, transportation to work. You can't cancel rent. You can't decide electricity is optional this summer. You can't drop health coverage when you've got kids depending on you. And here's the thing nobody's saying loudly enough. When inflation cools in discretionary categories but stays firm or rises in essential ones, the headline number improves. Your account balance doesn't. For most working households, essential costs aren't a small slice of the budget. They're the majority of it. So when pressure concentrates there, the official average looks calm. Life does not. That's the gap we're closing today. And it starts with the bill most people don't notice becoming a problem until it already is. Think about the last time you consciously thought about when to run your dishwasher. Not because you were out of dishes, because of the rate. Or when you pushed laundry to the weekend to spread the electrical load. Or let the house warm up a few degrees before switching on the air conditioning, in a way you never used to think about. That low-grade, constant calculation around a bill you can't avoid, that's what a utility cost increase actually feels like. Not panic, not a headline event, just a bill you now plan around. According to BLS CPI data from early 2026, utilities were still running elevated year over year. Electricity and natural gas both showed meaningful increases. And because the overall headline inflation rate can look moderate while electricity keeps climbing, this pressure doesn't register in the news, but it registers in the account. Here's the structural reason this may not ease quickly. And it's the part most people haven't heard. The United States is consuming more electricity than at any point in its history. The driver isn't just more households or more devices. It's infrastructure, massive digital infrastructure, data centers, cloud computing facilities, AI processing systems. These are real physical buildings pulling enormous amounts of real power from the same grid your home is connected to. The Energy Information Administration has flagged record and near-record power demand as a growing trend. When national demand rises faster than generation capacity can keep pace, the economics shift. Utilities face higher costs, infrastructure investment pressure, and rate case filings. Those pressures flow downstream, not all at once but gradually, embedded inside the rate structure. Here's how it works at the household level. A new data center comes online in your region. It doesn't raise your bill directly. You never see it. But it adds baseline load to a grid already running with limited surplus capacity. Over time, that tightening changes how your utility prices its service. You never see the data center. You see the bill. Energy prices are volatile. Gas can fall while electricity rises. Natural gas can drop in winter while sewer fees climb. Some months genuinely look better than expected. But the direction across these categories taken together has been upward. That's what embedded pressure looks like, not an explosion, a slow drift into a place that's hard to get out of. Utilities steadily shrink your margin. But what comes next doesn't just shrink your margin, it takes away your room to move entirely. Housing doesn't reduce your margin. It eliminates your options. There's an important difference. When your utility bill goes up, it costs a little more each month. When your housing cost goes up, it raises the floor that everything else in your life has to operate above. Savings plans change. Every major decision gets filtered through the monthly payment. The space available to everything else in your budget doesn't just shrink at the edges. It collapses at the center. According to BLS CPI data, shelter remains one of the most significant contributors to overall inflation in 2026. Even as other categories have softened, housing keeps pushing upward. And the reason it carries so much weight isn't just its share of the index, it's its share of actual household income. When 30 to 40% of what a family earns goes straight to housing, a 5% increase doesn't feel like 5%. It feels like the difference between being okay and being paralyzed. Small percentages on a large base cause real damage. There's also a data lag most people don't know about. Housing inflation is slow to appear in official numbers because the data captures rent changes only when leases renew or new agreements are signed. Leases are fixed-term contracts, so when rental markets shift, what's happening to existing tenants can take months to show up in the index. That means official housing data often understates what sitting tenants are currently experiencing. When a lease renews, the new figure lands all at once, not gradually. It becomes the new baseline immediately. No comparison to 2 years ago, just a new fixed commitment leaving the account every month. What about moving somewhere cheaper? The friction of relocation is genuinely expensive. Deposits, application fees, time off work, moving costs. For most households, switching to a cheaper unit isn't a free move. It's a transaction with upfront costs that could take months to recover. So people stay. And staying means absorbing the increase. For buyers, the pressure is equally real but works differently. Even when home prices level off, the monthly payment is driven primarily by the borrowing rate. A house that costs the same as 2 years ago, financed at a higher rate, costs more every single month. The affordability isn't in the price, it's in the payment. Some markets are stabilizing, and new construction in certain areas is genuinely adding supply. But stabilizing at a level that was already uncomfortable isn't relief. The discomfort doesn't disappear. It just stops getting worse at the same speed. Here's the core reality of housing in 2026. It doesn't need to be in crisis to dominate a household's financial life. It just needs to be high. When the single largest line item in your budget consumes a third of your income, everything else adjusts around it. Savings timelines get pushed back. Career decisions run through the filter of the monthly payment. Life plans get quietly delayed. Not because anything went catastrophically wrong, but because one number stayed too high for too long. Utilities took their margin. Housing took their flexibility. And there's a third category that adds something neither of those do. It adds unpredictability. Most costs in your budget, even the hard ones, are at least predictable. You can estimate your August electricity bill. You know which month your lease renews. Predictable costs are manageable. You can plan around them. Healthcare is different. According to KFF analysis for 2026, ACA marketplace premiums saw significant increases across many plans and markets for households without strong employer coverage or those near subsidy income cliffs. That premium change lands directly on the monthly bill with the same negotiability as rent, which is none. But what makes premiums uniquely difficult is how they're priced. They're not based on what healthcare cost last year. They're based on what insurers project it will cost in the year ahead. When utilization is rising, when drug costs and hospital rates keep moving up, that forward projection gets baked into your monthly payment before anything has even happened to you. You're paying for anticipated risk before the risk materializes. The practical consequence is behavioral. When premiums rise to a level that feels like a strain, households start making different calculations about actually using the coverage they're already paying for. Routine appointments become something you reconsider. Specialist referrals get pushed to next year. Dental work that was recommended 6 months ago gets deferred again. This isn't carelessness, it's math. When coverage is expensive, the additional cost of using it becomes a real calculation, and people make the rational, if unfortunate, choice to delay. And then there's the layer that makes healthcare truly impossible to fully budget for. Even when you do everything right, choose carefully, stay in network, set aside for your deductible. A single medical event can introduce costs that were never in the plan. One ER visit, one unexpected diagnosis, one procedure, more complex than anticipated. Any of those can produce financial consequences that take months or years to absorb. Fixed monthly obligation, variable risk exposure. In a system where opting out isn't actually an option, you can choose not to upgrade your car. You cannot choose not to need medical care. When people say basic costs are rising faster than expected in 2026, part of what they mean is this: the bills that were already there are bigger, and the risks that were already there feel larger, both at the same time. That combination creates a specific kind of financial anxiety that's completely different from worrying about something you want but can't afford. Utilities shrink your margin. Housing shrinks your flexibility. Healthcare makes the future harder to plan for clearly. And we haven't even gotten to the two categories that hit every single week. Quick pause here. Utilities, housing, healthcare, that's genuinely a lot to take in. These are compounding pressures, and the three together form a structure that no amount of budgeting discipline fully escapes. Two more categories to cover. They're not single category crises on their own, but they operate through repetition and frequency, and that's where the exhaustion quietly accumulates. Groceries don't make the news the way housing does. No single grocery run feels like a crisis, but the cumulative shift is real. According to BLS-CPI food data, food away from home has risen faster than food at home over recent 12-month periods. That one pattern changes behavior more than any individual price spike. When eating out becomes visibly expensive, home cooking stops being a preference and becomes the only practical option. But that shift means grocery spending absorbs a bigger share of the food budget. Right at the moment, the grocery baseline itself has moved up. The place you retreat to when restaurants feel too expensive has itself gotten more expensive. The response is behavioral. comparing unit prices between unfamiliar brands, building tighter meal plans, leaving checkout with a quiet surprise at the total, even after careful shopping. Not because habits got worse, because the baseline moved and the adjustments are now permanent parts of the routine. Transportation runs a parallel pattern. Gas prices get the most attention because they're the most visible. But total transportation cost isn't just fuel. It's the insurance policy that renewed higher, the maintenance appointment that expanded beyond routine, the registration fee that increased without much notice until the bill arrived. Auto insurance went through a sharp run-up in prior years, driven by higher vehicle replacement costs, increased claim frequency, and rising repair expenses. Insurance markets don't simply unwind increases when underlying pressures ease. They adjust slowly, if at all. A premium that jumped 30% over 2 years does not drop 30% the following year. It stays, and the new number becomes the baseline. The important thing about groceries and transportation is how they differ from the larger categories. Housing resets once a year. Healthcare resets at enrollment. Groceries and transportation show up every week. Every time you fill up, every time you go to the store. Frequency compounds. The household adjusting brand choices, planning meals more tightly, monitoring fuel, deferring a repair until next month, all simultaneously, is not a household in crisis. It's a household in constant management mode. And constant management is exhausting in a way that's hard to quantify, but very easy to feel. No single bill is catastrophic. The aggregate is. So here's the question that has to be asked. If these pressures are real, and the data backs them up, why did so many forecasts suggest 2026 would feel easier than it does? The answer isn't that economists were wrong about the aggregate. It's that the aggregate is the wrong thing to measure. There are 4 specific reasons official forecasts consistently miss how costs actually land. And each one is worth naming clearly, because together they explain the entire gap between the headline and the experience. The first is concentration. When inflation cools in discretionary categories but holds firm in essential ones, the headline improves. Your account doesn't. Essential spending takes up a disproportionate share of income, especially for working and middle-income households. When pressure concentrates there, the blended average masks it. You get told things are improving, while the bills consuming most of your income haven't moved in your direction. The second is timing. Official data tracks gradual trends, but costs don't arrive gradually. They arrive in chunks. A premium goes up all at once in January. Rent resets completely on renewal day. One number replaced by a bigger one overnight. That abruptness doesn't appear on any trend line, but it shapes the actual experience more than the annual rate of change does. The third is compounding. Rent up modestly. Utilities up modestly, insurance up modestly, groceries up modestly. Each one looks manageable in isolation, but they're not independent. They all land on the same budget. And because the largest ones are fixed, there's no natural ceiling to the compounding. Once discretionary spending has been cut as far as it goes, the fixed bills keep arriving with nothing left to absorb them. The fourth is the reset effect. When a price level moves up and stabilizes, it doesn't feel like stability to the household paying it. It feels like permanent lost ground. The mental reference point, what felt normal, sits below the current level. Stabilization at a high level is not relief. It's the new difficulty made permanent. Polling throughout 2026 has consistently reflected this. A significant portion of American households, across a wide income range, describe feeling like they're working hard just to hold their position, not improving, not falling behind dramatically, just holding position through constant effort. That is the definition of an affordability squeeze, not catastrophe, compression. And that compression won't undo itself just because a headline says inflation is easing. Because it has structural drivers underneath it that are separate from the monthly CPI reading. Two forces keep showing up when you look beneath the surface of these categories. The first is electricity demand growth. The United States is in the middle of a multi-year expansion of energy consumption. Electrification is already here. Electric vehicles, heat pumps, industrial electrification, and large-scale digital infrastructure are all increasing the baseline load on the national grid. Data centers alone, the physical buildings that process the computing work of the modern economy, are being built at scale across multiple regions. They are energy-intensive in a way that meaningfully changes the demand picture at a national level. EIA projections have pointed to power demand approaching and in some cases reaching record levels. The grid wasn't designed for this load. Generation capacity and transmission infrastructure are being expanded, but infrastructure builds take years, not months. In the interim, the supply-demand balance tightens. That tightening doesn't immediately produce dramatic price spikes in regulated markets. Rate cases and regulatory approvals create a time buffer. But it does produce embedded upward pressure that works its way into what households pay over time. A household with no connection to the technology industry still finds its electricity bill moving upward in ways that feel completely disconnected from anything in its own life. Because in a connected grid, demand isn't contained. It flows through the same system that powers homes, apartments, and small businesses across entire regions. The second is healthcare pricing dynamics. Premiums are priced on what insurer's project will happen next year, not on last year's costs. When utilization is rising, when underlying medical costs are climbing, when regulatory uncertainty changes risk calculations, all of that gets baked into your monthly payment before any of it fully materializes. KFF analysis for 2026 identified premium increases across many ACA marketplace plans, substantial enough to directly affect real household monthly costs. The directional signal is consistent across most markets. Premiums are not declining. For households without strong employer subsidies, those increases land in the budget without offset. The third layer is policy and supply chain effects. Harder to trace to a single source, but real. Trade policy changes, regulatory shifts, and input cost adjustments at the production level don't create immediate, visible price changes for households. They work through supply chains over months and quarters. When businesses face higher input costs, some of that pressure eventually moves downstream. Not all of it. Not instantly, but enough to lift cost floors on food, goods, and services. Slow-moving structural adjustments. Headlines miss them almost entirely, but they're exactly what creates persistent pressure that doesn't respond to one good jobs report or one better-than-expected CPI print. Headlines chase the dramatic. Structural forces shape the decade. Here's where this gets practical. Because understanding the structure only helps if it tells you what to actually watch. On utilities, pay attention to rate case filings in your region. Most state utility commissions publish proposed increases months before they take effect. This is public information. If your provider has filed for a meaningful rate increase, it's going to show up on your bill. And knowing in advance means you can plan around it, rather than absorb it as a surprise. Also, watch seasonal demand patterns. Summer peaks are historically when usage bills spike, highest. If your utility offers time-of-use pricing, understand what the structure actually means for your household before opting in. Some plans genuinely reward off-peak usage. Others shift risk in ways that don't benefit families with inflexible daily schedules. On housing, national rental trend data is context, not your number. Your number is your specific market, neighborhood, and building. Track rental supply in your metro area. When new units are coming online, competitive pressure slows renewal increases. When supply is tight, there's less incentive to negotiate. Knowing which situation you're in before the renewal conversation gives you real leverage. If you own, Pay equal attention to property tax reassessments and homeowners insurance renewals alongside mortgage rate news. Both have moved significantly for many households and don't follow the same trajectory as home prices. They can rise independently even when broader housing headlines sound stable. On healthcare, the calendar is your most valuable tool. Know when your open enrollment window opens. Before it does, know your current premium, deductible, and out-of-pocket maximum. When the notice for next year arrives, look at total financial exposure across different usage scenarios, not just the monthly number. A lower premium with a higher deductible isn't automatically worse or better. The right answer depends on your household's realistic healthcare usage. If you're on the marketplace, track subsidy thresholds carefully. Income changes can shift eligibility in ways that significantly affect your net cost. Worth calculating, not assuming. On transportation, look at your total vehicle cost: insurance, registration, maintenance, and fuel combined, compared to the same period 2 years ago. If that total has grown faster than your income, the growth is real even if no single line item looks alarming on its own. Auto insurance has been slow to reverse multi-year increases. Calmer gas prices don't automatically translate into lower overall transportation costs. On groceries, track your monthly total rather than individual item prices. Individual prices are volatile and category averages can mislead. If you're consistently spending more on the same shopping patterns, even after adjusting brands and meal planning, that gap between expectation and reality is real pressure. It belongs in your honest accounting of what your budget actually requires. The underlying principle across all 5 categories is the same. Aggregate data moves slowly. Official reports lag. Your bills update monthly. If 3 categories stabilize while one large fixed cost resets higher, the stress in your budget reflects the reset, not the 3 that held steady. And if your income didn't grow at a pace matching the combined increases across these categories, the gap is real regardless of what any index says. There's a question that comes up whenever people talk about fixed cost pressure, and it almost always misses the real point. The question is, if the pressure is structural, is there anything you can actually do? The answer isn't simple. And the reason most financial advice misses this is because it was designed for a different problem. Budget more carefully, cut subscriptions, cook at home, reduce unnecessary spending. That's all real advice. And it's not wrong. But it's advice built for discretionary overspending. A fixed cost problem doesn't respond to those solutions. You can't budget your way out of a rent increase. You can't track your spending more carefully and bring your utility rate down. You can't shop for a better premium mid-year when the enrollment window is already closed. The tools for managing fixed costs are fundamentally different from the tools for managing variable spending. What actually helps in a fixed cost environment comes down to 2 things: timing and information. Timing matters because the windows, when you can make decisions about fixed costs, are specific and narrow. Open enrollment, lease renewal, the month before an insurance policy renews. Outside those windows, the choices are mostly locked in. Inside them, you have real leverage. And that leverage disappears quickly. Information matters because most households don't have a clear picture of what their fixed costs actually total, or how much that total has changed over time. Knowing your monthly premium is not the same as knowing your total annualized healthcare exposure, premium plus deductible plus out-of-pocket maximum. Knowing your weekly fuel cost is not the same as knowing what your total vehicle costs looked like last year compared to 2 years prior. Building that full picture isn't complicated, but it's the work that shows you where the actual pressure is coming from. Not which category feels most urgent in a given moment, but which one is quietly consuming the most over the course of a year. And when you can see that clearly, you know exactly where to act when those narrow windows open. This isn't a complete answer. Fixed costs rising faster than income is a problem that can't be fully solved at the household level. The structural forces driving it operate well beyond individual decisions. But within the space that actually exists, timing and information are the levers that matter. Using them well won't eliminate the pressure. It reduces how much of it lands as an unexpected hit. And unexpected hits in a tight budget are expensive, not just in money, but in the mental energy absorbing them consumes. Energy that has to come from somewhere. There's a phrase that keeps coming up when people describe what 2026 feels like financially. Running in place, moving constantly, putting in real effort, not actually gaining ground. Sit with that for a second, because it captures something precise. Running in place isn't falling behind. You're not in a downward spiral. You're sustaining your position through constant, genuine effort. But the whole point of that effort, the aspiration behind it, isn't just to sustain. It's to build, to save towards something, to feel like the work is slowly translating into something that accumulates. When fixed costs consume so much of what you earn that what's left can't generate real savings, that sense of building disappears. The effort becomes maintenance. And maintenance without progress, year after year, produces a very specific kind of exhaustion that goes well beyond money. This isn't irrational. It isn't anxiety disconnected from reality. It's an accurate read of the structural environment millions of households are navigating right now. And it deserves to be treated as the real, data-supported experience it is. Not dismissed because a headline index happened to improve. Here's what we covered today. Basic living costs in 2026 are rising faster than expected, not because every category is spiking, but because increases concentrated in the categories you simply can't negotiate away. Utilities held firm, backed by structural demand growth that isn't reversing quickly. Housing set a high baseline and stabilized there, which registers as progress in the data and doesn't feel like progress in the budget. Healthcare added both fixed monthly obligations and unpredictable risk exposure. Groceries and transportation applied consistent secondary pressure that compounds the larger forces above them. Official forecasts miss the lived experience because they measure averages, track gradual trends, and distribute pressure across a blended index. Real households don't experience a blended index. They experience the specific categories consuming the largest shares of their income at the exact moment those costs reset, with no substitute available. The structural forces behind all of this, electricity demand growth, healthcare pricing dynamics, and supply chain effects pushing cost floors upward, are not short-term fluctuations. They're embedded in the system for the medium term. And the households navigating this are, in large numbers, doing everything right. Tracking, cutting, adjusting, planning, and still feeling the compression. Because the compression isn't coming from their choices, it's coming from the structure around them. Understanding that is not a solution, but it is an honest account. And when so many people are being told the problem is less severe than it feels, an honest account is not a small thing. So here's the question I'll leave you with. If the official numbers say relief is here, but millions of households still describe running in place, which one do you trust? And what does it mean if those two things keep pointing in different directions? Drop your answer in the comments, because this conversation is worth having.